Hello, fellow Rebel Capitalists. Hope you're well. I'm here with my good buddy, Robert Barnes, and I asked him, Robert, what's been on your mind lately? And I said, whoa, stop, time out. Let me go ahead and hit the live button because you're getting into some incredible insider intel. So I'll hand the baton back over to you. Well, tell everyone about that call that you just got off.
Yeah, so I just got off a court call with the Commonwealth Court of the state of Pennsylvania concerning two gentlemen, one of whose wives reached out to me 2 weeks ago and told me a story I couldn't believe was even possibly true. I thought there must be something missing. They must have, not be telling me everything. Maybe they don't know everything. And because what they told me is my husband is a blue-collar worker, helps out Amish farmers in Pennsylvania. He was just picked up by the local sheriffs and has been dragged to prison. And we don't know how long he's going to be there. And I was like,
prison, yeah, we got to even back up from there. They took him to jail. He hasn't had a time in court. I mean, how can this?
None of it. They just show up. Sheriffs say we're here for you. In between, they sort of take a little sneak peek and ransack different things around the house, and make sure his teenage daughter is they engaged in some extra activity. Let's put it that way, because cops will do what cops will do. But then all of a sudden, they put him in the back of the police car, and the wife's like, "What's going on?" And he's going to the York County Prison, which is the local prison there in Pennsylvania. Another one got taken to the Lancaster County Prison. The one taken to one prison wasn't even given proper phone access. The phone number wouldn't work. He couldn't reach anybody for days. His wife couldn't reach him. Nobody knew what the heck was happening. His buddy that works with him was also in prison. And so they reach out to my offices and they tell me that story. And I'm like, hold on a second. You mean they've never been criminally prosecuted? No. They've never even been named parties to a suit? No. They never had a trial? No. Did they even know that there was an arrest warrant out for them? No idea. And it's like, what the heck? And then I get a copy of these arrest warrants, and they look like somebody wrote them up from like the 1840s. Like, it's like someone just typing away. It's like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then I come across, finally get my hands on the order of commitment. What makes all this weirder is you go to the court docket and you search their names. It doesn't exist. There's no court record concerning them at all. We sort of dig in and find out that there's an order of commitment that the sheriffs have, and they show us, and they're like, and it's a judge has signed, just lock these people up. It explains nothing else. This order of imprisonment. Like, what the heck? And the caption on it just says administrative subpoena, and it's like, where does people getting locked up for administrative subpoena? It makes no sense. The dig-in file, it turns out there's a secret court file in the Commonwealth Court that these guys didn't even know about. They had been judged guilty of something that they had never even been charged with, were never even named parties to, and they were just ordered imprisoned by a judge who was just signing whatever the government asked him to sign, with a court, by the way, that doesn't even have criminal jurisdiction, doesn't even have authority over criminal cases. So we're having to figure all this craziness out. We have to file an original petition for writ of habeas corpus before the Supreme Court, another immediate motion for release before the Commonwealth Court, the court that issued this order. It's kind of like a state administrative regulatory court primarily. And the judge, I guess our filing with the Supreme Court might have got the judge's attention. The judge all of a sudden schedules an immediate hearing. We have the hearing, and they're pretending it's some form of civil contempt. They're going to finally, make all the proceedings public. A judge accepted our objections on that. No more secrecy, no more star chamber type proceedings. And hopefully the judge is going to release him quickly because it was all illegal. I mean, you can't get locked up and put in prison without due process of law. Can't be an excessive fine under the Eighth Amendment. Can't be cruel and unusual punishment for involuntary behavior under the Eighth Amendment, currently before the Supreme Court on the homelessness matter. And it violated all of Pennsylvania's rules. That, right to bail, right to trial, right to notice, right to trial by jury, right to proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, right to preparative defense, right to counsel. All of them violated. All of them. These guys were given nothing. They were just taken, thrown in prison. And apparently the state agencies are used to getting away with it. And then the real backstory, turns out, is there's a small group of vets, not vets like veterans who serve in war, but pet doctors. A small group of pet doctors want a monopoly on the Amish farming market. And they want to force the Amish farmers to hire them at inflated fees and cost for anything to deal with their cattle. And these guys provide better do better work at that as agents of them, and at much more affordable rates. They were farmers themselves historically, and so that's these veterinary board members basically were like, these guys are taking away our business. Let's weaponize our licensure monopoly through the state government, our buddies and pals and the state board. Let's take these blue collar guys out. Let's fine them to oblivion, pretend that they're supposed to have a vet license when they in fact are not. And if they don't play ball, hey, we'll just get a judge to go lock them up and send them into prison. Now we'll wake everybody up and force the Amish to have to deal with us vets and double and triple their fees and costs. So
I mean, it's mafia.
it's just, yeah, completely.
It's
Exactly.
mafia
It's like
tactics.
it's just extortion. That's all it is. I mean, this is criminal behavior. It's the Pennsylvania Department of State that's complicit in it. They duped a court to sign illegal orders to be part of it. They got local sheriffs to enforce these orders that are not even legal in the first place. That the sheriffs admitted, we've never seen anything like this. That's because it's not legal, sheriff. You're not supposed to I can't just fax something and say, hey, will you lock up my friend, my ex-wife down the street? I got a little arrest warrant for you, sheriff. Here you go. But that's what's happened. So it's one of the many crazy cases of late in Pennsylvania, but reveal the deeper problems in the American legal system.
Just so I understand this, you've got a group of vets, the pet doctors, that look at the Amish as a cash register,
Exactly,
as an ATM machine, and they're like, okay, that's the goose that's laying the golden egg right there. So the Amish do so much with their cows, with their horses, with their pigs, whatever. We want to make sure that whenever one of these Amish people, which is a good majority of the farmers within the area, have any problem with one of their animals, they, by law, have to go through us. So therefore, we have a monopoly. So therefore, we can charge any price we want to. And they quite literally don't have a choice but to pay us. And then there's some blue collar guys that say, well, look, you don't need a vet license to give a cow like an ultrasound, which I think is one of the things they're doing. And so we'll go ahead and do that. You guys know us well, and we'll just charge you whatever our cost is plus 20% or something like that. And then the vets see this as a threat. So then they call all of their cronies and in the local state sheriff or whoever it is. And you get this network effect where all of them are complicit. And the bottom line is they just figure out, well, how can we get these guys in jail? And then even if they get out, it'll send a message to everyone else that, hey, don't screw with us on a moving forward basis. If we want your business, you better damn well give it to us, and you better not compete with us, or you're going to end up like Blue Collar Joe and Blue Collar Steve that have, I don't know how long they've been in jail. And the argument on the sheriff's side, or the people that are in legal authority, I'm assuming is, well, Robert, you just don't understand the backstory here, because we've been serving these guys. We've been trying to get them to come into court and plead their case. We've been trying to go through all of the typical legal guidelines. We've been trying to dot the I's and cross the T's, but because they've ignored us, then we've been pushed to a point where we have no other option than to just go down to their house and take them into custody, because they haven't responded to anything else. Is that their argument? Have I summarized it?
Yeah, in essence. And even though they're pretending, well, in America, there's a difference between what's called civil contempt and criminal contempt. So criminal contempt is punishment, and that requires all the due process, right to bail, right to trial by jury, all of those things. In Pennsylvania. Then there's civil contempt, and civil contempt is sometimes called coercive contempt. It has to be conditional or contingent. The famous phrase is, it's civil contempt if you were given the keys to your own jail cell. It's criminal contempt if you weren't. The problem here was the state was like, well, we don't want to give them the keys to their own jail cell. We don't want them to actually comply. We want to shock and awe them by locking them up. So we'll disguise this as civil contempt, but the actual order is an order of criminal contempt, because they weren't given any keys to their jail cell. It was straight to prison for you. And because they love that power, They see that power. It's what I always tell people. And they're like, let's have this government program or this government agency or this government institution. And it's like the first question you should ask yourself is, who are you giving the power to? When you give power,
and how will the future people use that against you?
exactly. The reality is you give a small group of people power, they will abuse it. That's the whole history of the world. And we should give as few small groups of people power as possible. I like the diffusion and dispersion of power in the individual as much as practical. And this is examples why. It's also show we got to get rid of licensing. This is a classic abuse of licensing because these licensing boards were given authority to investigate people who choose to be licensed. And they're there to make sure that they're following the rules of their license. These guys are not licensed. They've chosen not to be licensed. If they think they should be licensed, that should go to the local DA to argue unauthorized practice of whatever. It should not be within their jurisdiction to begin with. What they're doing is saying, well, the IRS did this a couple of years ago. They're like, well, we're going to allow you to be licensed to appear before the IRS. Oh, we're going to use that to go after everybody who's not licensed before the IRS. It's like, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And they used it to censor speech. They used it to try to get people disbarred from their local state accounting or licensed bar agents, Supreme Court, whatever it may be. They did it in case of Joe Bannister, a client I represented for years. And so it just shows how dangerous this power is becoming. We're seeing it in lots of different contexts. People who oppose, have election challenges. Now those lawyers are being subject to disbarment proceedings and criminal prosecutions. This is just probably the most extreme example I've ever heard. Two guys not subject to a license. The law doesn't require for them to be licensed for what they're doing, serving Amish farmers who don't want licensed people, getting locked up into prison because the state agency wants to pretend they should be licensed so they can weaponize licensure to monopolize and create a cartel. I mean, instead of even the mob usually gave you a little more notice. I mean, than the state has done here. They said it'd be terrible if something happened.
Break your knees first or something.
Yeah, exactly. They come by with somebody physically intimidating. Yeah, you really need to pay up, George. No, they not the state. They just come drag you off right in front of your wife and kids off to prison. It's insanity what's taking place.
Yeah, and the pushback that you always get is, well, we have to have people licensed, Robert, because if you were getting brain surgery, wouldn't you want to make sure that your doctor had all of the certificates and all the education and whatnot? And
it's
even
to keep
if you
you
want
safe,
to argue,
George.
even
it's
if
always
you want
to keep you safe. It's the government's just here to keep you safe. That's what they're here to do. They're not here to monopolize part of the economy, to inflate part of cost, to help their political pals have their own ideology imposed on us. No, that would never be the case. They're just here to keep us safe and make sure it's all done right.
And that's why you always have to do a proper cost benefit analysis, because even if that's your argument, you're only looking at one small benefit. You aren't looking at all the costs that come along with that, to the point where now we're not just talking about brain surgeons. We're talking about people that are giving an ultrasound to a cow, for heaven's sakes, or correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to have a license to even cut people's hair in a lot of states, or to do their nails. Isn't that true?
Oh, they're trying to license everything. Yeah, you want to do your nails, need a license. Want to give a massage, need a license. Well, want to cut hair, need a license. Want to have a plumber, fix your plumbing, got to have a license. Mechanic, license. Everything's got to be licensed. And then they use and weaponize that licensure to create cartels to benefit their pals. I remember it was an old debate I had related to Joe Rogan once asked Dave Rubin this question, where Rogan was like, oh, we need these regulations to keep us safe. And the reason why the third world doesn't have safe construction is because they don't have enough rules. And I was like, Joe, there's tons of rules in those countries. How do you think they shake people down? How do you think they extort people? They just interpret them more directly. In Africa, they just cut to the chase. Say, what's the rule here? For me to shake you down and you to line my pocket. There's other reasons why things aren't safe there. Lack of resources, lack of skill set, et cetera, in the construction industry. It isn't due to lack of rules. There's never been a long litany of rules that made us safer. All it ever did is give the government and a small group of people power to make our lives more miserable.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same argument for the minimum wage. It's why all these mega corporations always lobby for increasing the minimum wage, because they know it'll eliminate their competition.
Oh, great. It's what the FDA, USDA, all these agencies are. I mean, we have a corporatized, mechanized, industrialized, now monopolized food supply and medical supply in America. And the big companies love it because it drives out every small farmer, drives out every independent practitioner, drives out alternative health. It drives out, natural organic food. Pennsylvania's busy trying to do that as we speak, because in my Amos Miller Amish farmer case. And then in between, I picked up a case in Pennsylvania where they're trying to lock a lady up because she recorded her own court proceeding because she happened to expose lawyer and judicial corruption by recording it. And instead of investigating the corruption, they want to put her in prison because they want to make it illegal to record your own court proceeding, which is supposed to violate a whole bunch of constitutional rules. But it's micro examples of where the state is going, weaponizing everything in their power to suppress all of our liberties and freedoms.
I mean, it sounds like Pennsylvania has just gone full retard, right?
Yeah.
Like full authoritarian.
Commie retard.
They're like keeping you in business, Barnes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like every other week there's some new crazy case, and I'm like, that can't be true, and it turns out to be true. I dealt with some crazy cases. There was a judge in Wisconsin once who wanted to there was a local dispute, guy with the local fire department that wanted to argue that he needed to add 6 more things to his building, and he was like, nah, you're wrong. And so they got agitated and tried to keep fining him, and he was like, you guys don't even have authority where you're at. And so the local judge was real annoyed these people weren't respecting his authority. So he went and looked up some old 1820s orders, and he was like, oh, this is beautiful. And he just wrote it and put it in. And he ordered him to hard labor. He imprisoned him for debt. He's like, this is great. I love these imprisonment orders for debt. We had to sue him and remind everybody, peonage is still illegal in America. You can't lock people up for debt. This isn't Charles Dickens, 1820s England. But here it was today having to explain to a judge. Now, judge, you can't just lock people up because you feel like it. That's not part of the rules. You can't just sign everything the state blows across your desk. And I was shocked that I had to even explain this to a judge, but unfortunately, that's where we're at these days.
Well, he knows, but that's the catch. He knows exactly that it's illegal. He just doesn't care because he's just throwing around his ego, and he's just leveraging the law just to line his own pocket. I mean, this is how ththese things work. And to your point, this is why we have to keep a check on authority, and we have to go back to the good old days where we were a land of laws as opposed to men. I mean, you and I have had this conversation many times.
Absolutely. And the more power that it's in the ordinary person. I mean, the brilliance of the free market is it gives power to the ordinary person. It doesn't empower a small elite bureaucratic group that can monopolize or create cartels or anything like that. Because we've seen over and over again, you give a small group of people power, the world will get miserable sooner or later. It's only whether it's sooner or later, not whether it turns miserable. And we're just seeing it at scope and scale in Pennsylvania. But there's many other current illustrations of it at the time, or these days, as we speak.
Yeah, and what people, I especially see this on the right currently with the Republicans, is they'll sit there and they'll shout about how they want small government, how they want freedom of speech, until it's something until it's some law that they approve of. Then all of a sudden, big government's fine. And
exactly.
It's like, whoa, it's okay you got to remember that even if that's a law that you approve of, if you grant the government this type of authority, sooner or later, there's going to be someone in charge that doesn't like you, or doesn't like the way you live, or doesn't like what the priorities that you value. And even if the guy right now does, in 2 or 3 years, you're going to get someone in there that's a sociopath that's going to use all that power you just granted the government against you, your family, and the people that you really care about.
It's where my libertarian leanings with an anarchistic tendencies, as I describe it, against a populist backdrop. I was in high school. We went to the special governor school program, and they were teaching us about currency in a creative way. It was called Governor School for International Studies, and this old blue-collar Democrat that was governor back then that wanted to give blue-collar kids a chance, and so he created these programs. But one of the things they did was showing how power worked, and I still don't even remember how the experiment worked, but it dawned on me. I was like, okay, if we give a monopoly on both the means and tools of violence to a small group of people over the rest of us, what's the likelihood that small group of people is going to be the right group of people you would
Yes.
want.
Especially
What's
if
the
we're talking.
likelihood those people are going to succeed given the mechanisms? And what's the likelihood that once they have that power, even if they are well intended, they don't go AWOL, like the Milgram experiments and other experiments we've seen,
Yeah, right.
and the Stanford experiments and so forth. And it dawned on me from that point forward, it was like, that's why our Constitution was about distill power in ordinary people. Don't even give it to small groups of people. Don't give it the more power gets distant from it's the less it's diffused and the more it gets distant from ordinary people, the more guarantee of tyranny we will get. And that's what we're witnessing in live time.
What's the recourse for these gentlemen? I mean, how does this end? I would assume that if there's been this much injustice, that once you get involved, A, you can get them out, and then B, they can sue for damages or something like that.
It's going to be interesting because it's the classic case of false arrest, false imprisonment, malicious prosecution. And what you have to get around are all the immunities that the courts are really good about. They sit there and they don't want to give President Trump immunity at the moment for being president against his cases. But judges love to give themselves immunity, and they love to give their pals immunity.
Right.
And they're like, it's like one of the other case I have where the woman's being prosecuted and threatened with imprisonment for recording her own proceeding and documenting corruption in the legal system. The people that you have to go to stop it from happening are the people doing the violation. In fact, she filed suit in that case in federal court, and the federal judges say, now you got to go back to the state court. She's like, that's who's violating my rights. So you want me to go back to the person beating me up and say, would you please stop beating me up now? Yeah. Our federal civil rights laws were written because judges and sheriffs were the worst abusers in the post-Civil War South. The point was judges to be held responsible. But over the last half century or so, judges themselves have been carving out lots of exceptions, making it really hard to sue to get relief. So here's a go-ahead to sue for Wesley Snipes when a family court in New York issued an order to have, and then got this arrest warrant entered in Interpol to have him forcibly seized and his body fluids taken from him for DNA extraction, even though they knew the allegations against him were patently false. But this family court loved this power. They're like, oh, I can issue an arrest warrant and we can put it into Interpol. I mean, I had to be on the phone multiple times with airport officials across the world saying that's an illegal order. You don't want to be the guy on that lawsuit in your local country. You don't always have immunity there in South Africa or Namibia or France, wherever it may be. Ultimately, we had to sue. Federal judges tried to stop us from suing. We used the court of public opinion to expose what the city was doing. I met with Mayor Bloomberg's folks, and I had some pals that were on his staff, and they realized, oh, this is embarrassing. We got to get out of this before people realize how badly we abuse our power on a routine and regular basis. But it's the part of the problem. So we're going to look at every remedy possible. The hurdle is getting judges to allow you to get remedy when they're the ones causing the harm.
Wow. Well, you'll definitely have to keep us posted on this case because this just seems unimaginable. It seems like something that would happen in North Korea, but yet it's happening right here in Pennsylvania.
It's why I once had a case where we had an illegal extradition from Panama that they basically disguised it as a deportation. We ended up getting the documentation where the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Justice Department and their CIA/regional security officer/U.S. Marshal there in Panama said that they were doing the habeas grabus on our claim. I mean, they were proud of the illegality of what they were doing. Right. So we had to challenge all the misconduct that took place, got a lawyer from Panama to come up to testify. And he was thrilled after he testified. I thought because of the substance of what he testified to, all the craziness, the corruption, the fraud the government engaged in. Oh, no, he was thrilled that they had misspelled his name because he was like, Barnes, you don't understand. In Panama, they just come and knock, knock, boom, in trunk, bye. So now they won't know who to get because they misspelled my name. He was thrilled to get out of there. There's no court record of him officially be on the record. But that's what these guys experienced. Knock, knock, in the trunk, off to prison.
Wow. I mean, that's really scary for the rest of this. It really is. That was one of the aha epiphany moments that I had when I had to deal with that crazy in Connecticut. People who know my backstory know exactly what I was talking about. But prior to that, I was so naive. I didn't think anything like that could happen in the United States. And I thought stuff like that just happened in Russia or the KGB or in China or North Korea. But the more success you have in the United States, the more you see how the game is played. And the more you see just how similar the United States is to all these other countries that are supposed to be the quote unquote bad guy. The game is played the exact same way. It's just got a different label on it.
That's exactly right. Putin himself has made that point multiple times. He's like, you guys are worse because you guys disguise what you're doing. At least we do it. You know what we did and why we did it and how we did it.
That's the argument that you always hear from Americans against corruption. They say, well, yeah, but I mean, those third world countries, they're so corrupt. You know, you can pay off the politicians and whatnot. I'm like, what do you think lobbyists are in the United States? That's all you're doing, except in Mexico or Panama or Colombia or whatever it is. You just got to pay the cop $20, and it's kind of under the table or whatever. But in the United States,
it's more honest. It's more honest corruption.
All these thugs are wearing suits, and you got to pay them millions and millions and millions of dollars to buy off the politicians. But it's the exact same process.
No doubt about it. And it's designed basically, it's disguised. You got to do it politely. You got to do it with the right courtesy, with the right language. There's something.
And in the United States, we've legalized it. At least in yes. Colombia, it's still considered illegal, although people do it all the time.
Exactly.
All right.
Well,
so
I had an experience once in Germany, but that's another story.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Just what in Germany, it was the old Berlin was there for the World Cup. All of a sudden, apparently they have their enforcement agents look like ordinary people on the buses and the trains. My brother and I thought it was this great. We're like, man, everything's free here because we could just walk into all the trains for the World Cup. But they must have made it free for the World Cup. Turned out you're supposed to pay, and we didn't know. But this dude just hops up and says, and that's how they enforce. They enforce with like random undercover agents on the subway trains, whether you've been paying the tickets or not. So we didn't have our ticket. That was the first time we realized we were supposed to have a ticket. He takes me and my brother off. And then he goes, okay, you can go to the court. It'll be 150, or you can pay right here and it's 85. Yeah, and my brother wasn't getting the message. He was like, oh, okay, how does that work? I was like, I get the message. I understand. Here's the 85. Go home. In America, we just do it with a little bit more deception and dishonor, frankly, our corruption.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's go back to kind of what's happening with some of the Republicans here and some things that I've heard about lately that quite frankly, I don't like at all. And I know you really have your finger on the pulse of this stuff. So I was reading in the news that Abbott in Texas is actually in favor of these local universities censoring their students because he doesn't like the anti-Israel demonstrations or something like that. And I'm not here to say that it's, I'm pro-Palestine or pro-Israel or pro any of this stuff. But what I am in favor of is freedom of speech. And I think what defines freedom of speech is if you allow people to say things that you don't approve of, for heaven's sakes. So, what's going on in Texas with this Abbott guy?
What's extraordinary is they're always going to use, like they're using in certain cases, immigration laws in order to basically force us to have a permanent federal digital ID. In the future, they're going to pitch it as voter safety and integrity for us to have a national biometric ID. But you look at it's like, okay, what are they actually gaining in these cases? And the same is true with banning TikTok because there's like, oh, China's involved. So it's like, why are we banning an entire social media network? Is that such a good idea for the government to have the authority to do? Just call it a foreign adversary and magically you can just start seizing things all over the place like they're doing to Russians currently. And the same is true here. They find a way for conservatives to take the bait on giving the state power. And it's just a different security interest that they're citing. The Democrats may cite public health. They cite diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever may be their pretext for the state grabbing power. Our security, making sure the licensure is done for, safety purposes. But they sucker conservatives just as well on the same set of grounds. They just find a different set of values. Maybe it's moral values. Maybe it's protecting children. Maybe, whatever it is, there's always some pretext for why we have to give the government, a small group of people, the power to control our lives, power to control speech, the power to control our access to information, the power to control our vocation or occupations. And this is no different. And it's tempting because you have a lot of these commie kid protester types are not the most endearing people on the planet that are doing the various. And it's not like Hamas is your ideal institution to support, right? It's like nobody wants to line up and say, I can't wait to be on Hamas's side today. But that doesn't change. Speech is speech. Debate is debate. You answer it. It's what I've always said about licensure. It's like people say, well, what would happen if we didn't have licensure? The ordinary person would get to decide. They'd say, okay, what are your qualifications? Okay, what are your qualifications? Okay, we empower them, not a bureaucrat, to decide who's going to provide them services and care. It's trusting the free market. The same is true of ideas. We trust the free market. If Hamas is a bad idea, let it be exposed in the free market of ideas. If supporting Palestine or opposing Israel is a bad idea, let it be exposed in the court of public opinion. And it's not like they don't have arguments available. They can just say October 7th. They can say that. You got plenty of good arguments you can use against the Palestinian side. But the argument that's not okay is let's censor them. Let's lock them up. Let's make it a ban. Let's put in a speech code.
Because they deem it as being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, we already have rules on the books. If you're stalking or harassing, and there's some cases where that has happened, where some kid's been targeted because they're Jewish, right? There's already rules that protect that. You don't get to harass people. You don't get to stalk people. You don't get to, create a reasonable fear in somebody by your course of conduct. Speech doesn't go that far. You're not allowed to libel someone intentionally. We already have laws to protect those interests. We don't need the laws in the name of just generally. We think some of the people are motivated by opposing Jewish people. And the reality is a lot of the Palestinian movement and the people in the U.S. who support it, people like Glenn Greenwald, Thomas Massey just doesn't want us involved, period, the libertarian position. It's not because they're anti-Jewish. They happen to oppose Israel's set of policies. They happen to disagree with whether Israel's policies are good or bad for the world. Some oppose Israel's existence, but not because they hate Jews, because they just don't happen to agree with what they would call the Zionist mission. Now, I don't share a lot of their opinions, but those opinions are not trying to create a reasonable sense of fear in a specified individual because of their religious identification. That's not what's happening. Because, this could easily be flipped against conservatives who want to raise questions about radicalized, politicized Islam. Then, what if that all of a sudden gets banned because there's a religious subcomponent to that particular political movement and ideology that raises concerns with some Americans? We should separate out trying to create fear in an individual by sticking a burning cross on their front lawn and somebody who just has a general opinion opposed to a particular nation. And they're trying to blur those lines because they always have an excuse for power. That's always what it is. And the conservatives have just different excuses, but it's always about giving them power.
Yeah. Another good example of that is what DeSantis did just recently, or tried to do in Florida, where he wanted to make it illegal for like 14-year-olds to have a Facebook account or social media or whatever it was. And this is just insane. And then the pushback that you get from those people on the right is, well, this makes sense. I'm all in favor of small government. I'm all in favor of freedom of speech and letting people do what they want to do. But in this case, Robert, it makes sense because you're dealing with someone who's a minor. And you wouldn't make it legal for them to smoke cigarettes, would you? And my answer to that is, well, yeah, I actually would. I don't see why you restrict kids from drinking or smoking. People think that just because something is legal, that all these teenagers are just going to go gung-ho, and the next thing you know, they're all going to be drug addicts, or they're all going to be smoking cigarettes or something like that. No, it actually goes back to the parents, believe it or not, heaven forbid. And I can tell you, because in Colombia, as an example, I don't really know what drugs are legal or illegal, but what I can tell you, Robert, is you can pretty much get any drug you want, especially cocaine and marijuana, for heaven's sakes. You can get that on any street corner. Like anybody can get it, like whenever you want. The guys, I could just show you the guys that are selling it, because they always walk around with this thing around their neck and this tray where they're selling like gum and cigarettes and all these, and they always say chicle, chicle, chicle. But when you get closer to them, they're always like marijuana, coca, marijuana, coca, and they have it underneath their little drawer thing, right? That's kind of the game that's played. But to that, I would argue that there are far more kids in the United States that are doing drugs like cocaine and marijuana than in Colombia. Yet Colombia, you can get it. So it's just a terrible, terrible argument. And it just opens up the gate and puts us on this slippery slope to more and more and more authoritarianism, where, yes, today you may agree with 14-year-olds being banned from social media, but I can promise you in 2 or 3 years, that same power is going to be used against you in something you completely disagree with.
And not only that, they have to keep coming up with excuses for their budgets. That's the other, because so you create this new state power, then you create a bureaucracy to enforce that power. They all of a sudden have jobs and paychecks and pensions. How do they keep justifying their paychecks and pensions? They have to keep coming up with scary threats out there to justify their activity.
Right.
That's how they end up harassing people that you're like, what in the world? That's not what this was for. But they're like, hey, how do I justify increasing my budget next year? I got to find 5 or 6 people. It's like the cop who's sitting there, who's annoyed that he has to just ticket 50 people because he's got to hit his quota for the month. Right. Yeah. And now and then they'll admit it. They're like, this is not making the world safer. I'm wasting the public's resources, but I got my quota. Same dynamic here. That what we do is we create busy work for bureaucrats that ends up undermining everybody's freedom and liberty. They're always looking for an excuse to why they got to justify their paycheck. And, credit to Milei in Argentina. It's like one of the things that anybody, like if Trump is sincere about trying to change things here, or Robert Kennedy or others, you got to start shrinking the size of government, because as long as the bureaucracy exists, there's going to be a monetary motive. It's like the defense industry. Like all my small government conservative friends don't seem to believe in small government when it comes to the defense industry frequently. There was more money, more money, more money. It's like they're the biggest, a revenue sapper of any within our entire infrastructure. And it's like, what happens when you build up, you get all these weapons and you create all these paychecks and paydays for vendors and other contractors and Pentagon brass? They have to find excuses. They have to find conflicts. They got to make them up if they don't exist yet. They got to create them. Otherwise, the lords of war don't have any business. They're not getting any payday. So it creates it's like there's a perverse incentive for public health people to have pandemics because it justifies their existence. The worse the pandemic, the better it is that they have future employment guarantees. The same is true of the defense industry. So it creates distorted incentives that make all of our lives less safe and our liberties more at risk.
A funny story, when I was going through Argentina on this recent road trip, and I was trying to use gold, silver, Bitcoin, trying to sell them for cash, and most often unsuccessfully. But one of the guys that we found in Mendoza who would actually take some tether was this guy that owned this tech shop, and on the side, his side hustle was kind of this black market exchange for pesos and dollars. They call them cambios. And so we actually went up to his little shop there, and Robert, he just had stacks of cash. And I'm not talking about just pesos. I'm talking about dollars as well. And then he had the bank counters, that you put like that, because what he would do is the official exchange rate, let's say, was 800 to 1. When the real exchange rate on the black market, due to market forces, was, let's just say, 2,000 to 1. I'm just throwing out numbers for the sake of the example. So what he would do is he knew all the guys that would buy at 2,000, kind of the shady, the characters that were maybe trying to, I don't know, export those dollars outside of the country illegally or something like that. So what he would do is he would sell at 1,200 pesos, at 1,200 for dollars, and then he would sell those dollars for 2,000. He kind of pocket the spread. And I asked him, I said, just out of curiosity, what do you think of Milei? And he said, no, I don't like Milei. I'm like, why not? It seems like he's shrinking the size of government. He's going to get rid of the inflation. He's like, yeah, that's the problem. Because this is my business. Yeah. He goes, if the hyperinflation goes away, then I'm out of business. And it goes back to exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. I mean, it's extraordinary. And I think it's one of the things that people ideologically and intellectually, as they think through solutions to the problems we face, I always encourage them to say, who am I going to give the power to? Don't
Mm.
think just about the substance of the law, the substance of, or even what your goal or objective is. Who you give the power to is going to shape that future. And even like for my friends on the left, it goes back to the old Marxist anarchist debate with Marx, where Marx was like, no, we got to create the small elite group that's going to bring about the revolution. And then, of course, they'll just step back and let the revolution magically develop into peaceful prosperity around the world.
Right.
And the anarchists were like, you give anybody power like that, it is going to corrupt every single revolution you think you're going to create. And of course, the anarchists were right. And it's one of the key principles of anarchism, I thought, that has intellectual validity, aside from its pragmatic limitation about how much people will ever accept it, is that you give any small group of people power, they will abuse that power. And so be very careful who you give power to, and don't let the reason you're doing it or the goal of what you're doing to distract from who you're giving the power to, because that's going to ultimately shape the outcome.
And I would be more specific. I would say not just the group of people or person, but the entity.
Yes.
Because the group of people can change. But if the entity has the power, then at some point in time, like we said earlier, there's going to be a sociopath that has an insatiable lust for power that's going to be in charge of that entity. You know, the example I always use, Robert, is I always look at the government like Hannibal Lecter. Remember Silence of the Lambs? How Jodie Foster, she was warned, don't even come within 50 feet of this guy. Don't talk to him. Don't do anything, because he is so dangerous that even if he helps you get Buffalo Bill, it may not be worth the price you have to pay in dealing with his ability to psychologically manipulate you, and therefore, society at large. And that's how we have to look at government. You're dealing with Hannibal Lecter. So at the very least, you want to only use government in those emergency situations where the downside risk of not using government is just absolutely catastrophic, like you could have argued with Buffalo Bill. But you don't use government to determine what you're going to have for lunch today, because if you use Hannibal Lecter for those purposes, before you know it, he's got you comatose, eating your own brains, or whatever he did to that guy Ray Liotta.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, why don't we go and talk about the election? Because I know that you always keep your finger on the pulse of this as well, for content. It's part of your business, but then also I think you wager on it. I don't know if you're planning on wagering on this year's election as well, but how are you seeing the politics play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating. So you have multiple levels. I mean, what you have sort of burgeoning around the world is a populist revolution, a freedom and liberty revolution, increasing skepticism about concentrated power in state institutions. And that even on the left side, it's increasingly the political rebellions are of a populist hue, of a populist variety.
Yep.
And I think and the U.S. is no exception. And what you have is such a deeply corrosively corroded deep state. Whether you call it the national security state, the administrative state, the military industrial complex, people can choose whatever label they want. The idea of the deep state was that you have a dual state with an administrative government and an elected government, and increasingly the administrative government actually governs and is independent of elections because they're not governed by elected officials effectively. The deep state is what happens when you have a dual state with control over the military, police, surveillance, intelligence, etc. Then you get a deep state with such entrenched power that even presidents can't challenge it, or they end up impeached, indicted, or assassinated, as has happened in the United States. And so I think so they're going, the system is completely falling apart. They just manufacture fake economic numbers. The last group that the sort of democratic political establishment, the neoliberal class, was relying upon were millennials and Zoomers. But they're getting hammered at every conceivable level. Can't afford a home, can't afford rent, can't afford a car. The jobs they're being offered are not good. Often they're doing there's when Biden goes out and says, "Oh, look at all the new jobs." Yeah, that one full-time job you used to have, now you have 3 part-time jobs. Isn't that great? And you're making less money, less benefits, and you can't afford anything anyway. That's what they're experiencing. And then you look at their social life, that they can't afford to repay college. They figured out that was a sucker's bet. They got loaded with debt for nothing. It doesn't turn out that the philosophy or sociology degree does anything for you. What doesn't teach practical, pragmatic skills. And then you look at what's happening in their personal lives. I mean, like you've been on with Fresh and Fit and some of those folks. You look at young men. 2/3 of young men don't date anybody within a year in America.
Yeah.
That has never turned out well. There's the reason why we have monogamy and all these religious traditions is because it turned out when like 10% of the men were hogging 80% of the women, it didn't sit well with 80% of the men, and they tended to do something about it. And then they were like, well,
it sounds funny, but it's true. Yeah.
And they're like, maybe we need to guarantee there's got to be some women available. I mean, the Vikings started conquering the whole world because they didn't have enough women. So it just doesn't work out well, but it's happening to young men especially. And then young men are attacked for just being men. Toxic masculinity, all that nonsense. Every game or movie or comic they like has been ripped away from them. So there's just been a war on young people in America and in the West. And it's economic, it's cultural, it's political. And that was the group Democrats were depending on. And they have abandoned Biden entirely. So that's where there's the only way that it's going to be weekend at Biden's for the next 4 years if they get him in, because the extraordinary thing is the alternatives are even more unpopular. People dislike Kamala Harris even more. They dislike Gavin Newsom even more than Joe Biden. But Joe Biden has ridiculously low approval ratings.
I was just going to ask you about that.
I mean, yeah, it's in the low 30s. I mean, it's the lowest of any president ever. And the amazing thing is the economy isn't even officially in recession yet. So I mean, what happens when it's officially in recession? What happens when the unemployment numbers start officially ticking up? What happens when the system recognizes what's happening that ordinary young people are experiencing, which is real wages have declined for 3 years straight under Biden, particularly for working and middle-class people in America. And then when they see billions going to foreign countries, doesn't matter whether it's Israel or Ukraine, they just see billions over for their borders, but none for us. And so they see that dynamic, and Biden is basically a dead man walking. The only thing that can salvage or save him, their hope, is that all the criminal lawfare weaponized against Donald Trump. That they've crossed every bridge in that regard. That's why the New York criminal case, which Trump is the victim of extortion, so they indict him for being the victim of extortion by Stormy Daniels. The Florida case, he brings his own documents home. Now apparently that's a crime. The D.C. case, he called and said he wanted the election done with integrity. That's now suddenly a crime. They're trying to bankrupt him in New York for a business deal that the banks that supposedly were defrauded said they would do again tomorrow because of how much money they made on the deal. Yeah. I mean, it's one insane after insane, and they're just hoping that collectively and aggregately, either Trump gets worn down by it and steps back politically, which is not going to happen, or that the American public turn on him. But then the problem they have is the Robert Kennedy problem, is that you have Kennedy as the independent backup. So if something happens to Trump, those populist voters can vote for Kennedy. And if the voters are unhappy with Trump for whatever reason, they're not likely to turn back to Biden. They could go to Kennedy instead. And Kennedy could surge in such a way that who knows what his impact could be on the election, even potentially deciding the election if his electors deny either of the other two a majority. And he's one of the most famous names and one of the most famous families in American politics. And the other thing, and the deep state apparatus, national security, and folks hate, the intelligence community hate Kennedys more than anybody, and they hate Robert Kennedy more than they hate Donald Trump. Same with the Federal Reserve, the banker crowd, the Wall Street crowd, the big food crowd, the big pharma crowd, the George Soros and Bill Gates of the world. They see Trump as a nuisance. They see Robert Kennedy as an existential threat. And so here their choice they're going to be forced to choose increasingly between Trump or Kennedy, because one of them is going to win. Joe Biden is not, outside of really, really stealing it this time. I mean, it's one thing when it's a close election, you get a few extra ballots that just show up after midnight. It's tough when you got to get like 1 million in. It's the old Chicago joke where the guy's walking around registering voters, And this kid's like, do we have to keep doing this? And the older man turns to him. He goes, would you deny any of these people the right to vote? As he points out the beautiful cemetery. There's some limits at some point as to what you can get away with within the margin of fraud. And the betting markets were slow to it. They thought Trump would be taken out in the primaries. They thought there would be some replacement for Biden, but they didn't understand the underlying numbers. Biden is the most popular Democrat, which is damning about the Democrats, because it's not that he's popular; it's that he's the most popular amongst the alternatives, and that Trump people are going to rally to Trump in seeing this weaponized political system. They've locked up the prime minister of Pakistan. And it didn't work in Pakistan. And they thought, well, we'll take Pakistani-style third world banana republic, the word banana republic coming from U.S. governments, overthrowing governments on behalf of banana companies, the United Fruit Company and others, throughout large parts of Central America. It was some of those tours that Che Guevara was taking, the Argentine, when he took his own tour through Argentina and up through Central America, that radicalized him in the direction that it took. And the American people have seen through it, and they're going to continue to see through it. These are show trials. They're obvious show trials. They're an embarrassment to the rule of law. They're an embarrassment to America's constitutional republic. They're an embarrassment to anyone who believes in the rule of law. And they're a mockery of the American political system. But the system is so desperate to avoid the nuisance of Trump or the existential threat of Kennedy that it is willing to prop up weekend at Biden's and try to imprison his opponents. They've denied Robert Kennedy Secret Service protection, despite threats being made against his life. And now they want to take away Secret Service protection from Trump if they can get any good conviction from any of these show trials. And it's like, obviously you just want him killed. I mean, it's like, is that what would they do if Trump's assassinated, if Robert Kennedy's assassinated? What do they think the American people are going to do? I mean, I think they think, well, they got away with it in 1963. They got away with it in 1968. When Robert's father was assassinated and Martin Luther King were assassinated. But that left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and it led to the investigations that undid and exposed MK Ultra and the CIA and the NSA and Operation Northwoods and all of those things. So I think they're taking a big gamble by the way they're handling the process. But I think from a betting odds perspective, the economy is only going to get worse. The economy's bad. We're in a functional recession as far as working class people are concerned. We have been for a year. And the media lying to them and Biden lying to them just adds insult to injury. It tells them, oh, I'm totally disconnected from your reality. I don't understand your reality because I'm trying to gaslight you about something you know can't be true. You can gaslight people about a foreign war because they have no idea what's happening in that foreign nation that they're not connected to. You can't gaslight people into believing that they can balance their checkbook when they can't. That their savings continues to be depleted. The credit card rate debt continues to rise. The subprime default rates continue to increase. And the housing market is completely unsustainable. And if it is sustainable, it's going to be excluding working class and middle class, and particularly a whole generation of people from ever owning a home, which used to be the sine qua non of the American dream. So all of it, and the war overseas is not going to get any better. Biden's trying to figure out, well, maybe I could go to war with China too. We'll have war with China. We'll have war in the Middle East. We'll have war with Russia. What other dumb ideas can these people come up with? But Trump has a simple solution in terms of policy proposals for the campaign. Under Trump, you had peace abroad, prosperity at home. Under this guy, under the retard, you got war abroad and poverty at home. Elect Trump. That's his simple message. Now, the question is, how well will Trump campaign? I mean, there were a lot of issues with Trump's first term in terms of his policies and his rhetoric not matching up, personnel not matching up. According to Trump himself, many of his personnel were terrible. And I think that there's an issue there. Also, there's not a lot of meat in the bones. Trump's a great marketer. He's not really an architect or an engineer. And Robert Kennedy is an architect. And what's interesting about Robert Kennedy is putting meat on the bones. Let's have these policies involving Bitcoin, these policies involving the Federal Reserve, these policies involving these agencies, these policies involving looking at what exactly is going on with big food, what's going on with big pharma, what's going on with big tech, what's going on with the big banks. And that, I think, will generate more interest, enthusiasm, and excitement for a political revolution. And the only question is how and whether the system can be successful at deferring or delaying that revolution. But it's coming one way or the other. The people are sick and tired of elite institutions betraying them, shipping their jobs overseas, shipping their kids overseas, stripping them of every freedom and liberty they've ever believed in or wanted to seek in the name of the bureaucracy. The pandemic, was like a red pill suppository for a lot of people about the dangers of institutionalized government and the corrosive corruption of our systems of governance. And I think people are desperate for that way out. And the only question is whether the system will allow constitutional democracy to work or not.
And you can see it at every level. I mean, we started off the conversation just talking about some blue collar guy in Pennsylvania giving a cow an ultrasound. Then we finish here talking about Donald Trump, a former president, but it's the exact same shenanigans, the exact same stuff where these sociopaths are trying to get around the law, or in some cases leverage the law for their monetary or political gain. I mean, it's at every single level right now in the United States.
Absolutely. The way I've described it is Bill Gates' dystopian control grid, like Tron. And that, he has, and the four pillars of it are big tech, big food, big pharma, and big banks and financial institutions. And he has an economic interest in all of them. I mean, it's amazing his skill and gift in these things. But people want exit ramps because that system is becoming oppressive. They want to be able to buy food directly from the farmer, like the Amos Miller case and the Amish farmer. And what's the government trying to do? They're trying to prohibit ordinary people from being able to buy food directly from the farmer, made the same way it's been made for centuries.
Yeah, there's playing whack-a-mole.
Absolutely. Big tech, they're doing everything possible to immunize big tech and allow the collusion with the state to censor that case up before the Supreme Court of the United States and to cause all the harm that it is instituted. Big pharma, the COVID vaccine. I represent Brooke Jackson, the Biden administration's intervening in that case to try to completely shut down any discovery. The American people were defrauded to billions of dollars because Pfizer promised a safe, effective vaccine for the prevention of COVID-19. And what they delivered was dangerous, ineffective, not even a vaccine, didn't inoculate against anything, and didn't prevent COVID-19. And instead has led to the highest rates of death, disability, and discrimination of any drug in American legal history. Biggest public health scandal ever. But how is the Biden administration handling it? They're saying, Judge, do not allow discovery to happen in this case. Do not allow a jury to try this case. Do not allow to hear this case. Now, Brooke Jackson's had the courage to go forward, even when, after she brings this case, she's getting phone calls from Pfizer's lawyers on a number they're not supposed to have. She's, opening her mail and somebody had opened the mail before she got it concerning the matter. She's experienced all that insanity, lost her job and career path that she'd worked in for almost 20 years. But the question is, will our courts step in and save us or not? Will they uphold constitutional liberty or not? Will they put an end to this insanity, whether it's the big food, big pharma, big tech, or big banks? And that's going to be, we see it in the banking financial context because they're doing everything possible to weaponize the system to prohibit people from being able to be in the crypto economy. They're trying to call it a security so they can regulate it and run it out of Dodge or accuse people of crimes for merely trading it or having it. The Biden administration wants to tax it into oblivion. They don't want to allow it to be a commodity for currency exchange purposes or utility purposes. There's a war on crypto going on by the Biden administration at multiple levels that only people in the industry are really fully cognizant of, that if they win those, they can completely shut down the legal holding of Bitcoin or crypto anywhere in the world, unless it's been with their license, with their permit.
I just did a story on this, Robert. If you have a couple more minutes, can you explain Biden's tax proposal and how he's trying to pass through an unrealized capital gains tax, and talk about the constitutionality, if that's a word, of an unrealized capital gains? That's just really mind blowing.
There was a word for what it is. If they were honest, they would call it a property tax. But they know that ordinary people know that property tax isn't a wealth tax, like Elizabeth Warren likes to call it, or capital gains tax, like Joe Biden wants to call it. Everybody pays property taxes if they own a home in America. And they know that property tax, politically, that doesn't sound as good. So they call it unrealized capital gains, a wealth tax on those sneaky billionaires who are running around, run off like Elon Musk with all his troublemaking Twitter and whatnot too. There's a word for it. There's another word for it. It's called unconstitutional. So under the United States Constitution, you can only do a direct tax, and a direct tax was on my person or on my property. The most hated taxes were the head tax. which is just for existing, you had to pay $10 to the local lord. People hated that in America. My great-grandfathers were part of the people who resisted it there in Rhode Island. In fact, they all voted against the Constitution until it included a Bill of Rights to prohibit things like that. And so we said you couldn't do a direct tax unless it was both uniform and apportioned equally amongst the states. Apportionment is a technically impossible thing to do because what would happen is like New Yorkers would owe more tax than Louisianans, right? So politically, it's unpalatable. So no direct tax is constitutional. Now they get the 16th Amendment, and the 16th Amendment says you can tax income without regard to the uniformity or apportionment rule. But the Supreme Court comes in and says, well, all that income means is what we said it meant in the 1890s, which is profit gain severed from the source. In other words, it couldn't be a property tax. It has to be profit, realized profit, because that's the definition of profit under the Constitution. So that's why the word income has a constitutional constraint that Congress has tried to get around by never defining it. I mean, it's the weirdest tax known to man, because if you try to find out what income is what income is what income is what income comes from. You're like, hold on a second, you haven't even defined income. Peter Schiff's got his current battles with the rogue government agencies trying to harass him on the banks and the rest. But his father, who I represented for a period of time, who, if you got in a word in edgewise, you committed that was a miracle. But funny guy, wonderful guy, brilliant guy like Peter himself. But one of the things he pointed out was all along aren't you supposed to define what's being taxed? Isn't that always been a constitutional requirement in the Anglo-Saxon American British legal tradition? It is. And they never did. Why? Because they wanted to keep expanding it over time, keep pretending we're going to call this income and we're going to call this income. And now what they want to do is they want to call property income. By the way, the Irish side had this idea in the 1930s. They said, we really should tax people for cooking and cleaning in their own home. They said, there's really a market value for that. And, they're getting around not paying the tax by not having a maid do it. This is outrageous. Luckily, Congress decided not to go with them. But that gives you an idea for how they think. They want to reimpose a head tax for us for existing and say, well, your potential labor value, your unrealized gain of your labor value, let's say, like they do sometimes in child support cases. They'll say, George, you really could go out there and make $100,000 this year. And just because you've decided not to make that $100,000 is no excuse for you not to owe the tax on it. Just like they do this with child support all the time. They say you could make this amount of money, so we're going to assess that amount of child support against you. Of course, by the way around that is like my old football hero, Travis Henry. He just had so many kids, he capped out. So it turns out, there's diminishing rates, right? Once you get to 51%, they can't increase. So he's like, I can have 15 more kids now, and I don't have any increased child support obligation. But it shows you, but this is a property tax, and they're going to try to sneak it in any way they can. They're going to call it unrealized capital gain just to tax those big Wall Street billionaires. They're going to call it a wealth tax, like Elizabeth Warren wants to call it. They're going to, in the Bitcoin context, they're going to call it anti-money laundering laws. We got to make sure we know what the source is and so forth. But what they're trying to do is grab control of the internet, say you don't even own your own internet, whether it's a domain, whether it's a wallet address, all the rest. They're doing this at multiple fronts. It's a massive attack on every aspect of an exit ramp from their control grid. And the
excuse that they give, which is staggering, how many people go along with this, is you don't need to. In fact, the article that I was reading was from like a pro-Bitcoin blog, or what I think is a pro-Bitcoin blog. And they're saying, oh, yeah, it's this unrealized capital gains tax, but it's a big nothing burger because even if it is enacted, it's only on people that have over $100 million worth of assets. And I'm like, can't you see what they're doing here? Of course, it's the way the income tax was proposed in 1913. It's like, oh, Robert, don't worry about this. This is a nothing burger. It's only going to apply. First of all, it's only 5 or 6%. It's only going to apply to people that make over $500,000, which at that time would have been the equivalent of, who knows, $10 million or something like that. But sure enough, within 5 years, now all of a sudden it's 77%. and it applies to a much broader range of people. And then we, of course, know where that went, where the scale or the line just kept going down, 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 down to the point where income tax impacts not just the filthy rich, the billionaires, but it impacts the poor and middle class. And it would be the exact same thing with an unrealized capital gains, I can assure you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what they said the time the income tax passed is they said, this tax will never tax a hair on a working man's head. Well, that's how much hair you'd end up with if you were to believe these guys. That's precisely what their goal is, and their goal is power. I mean, it's like if you look at in your 1040 each year. Same with the exit tax, by the way. The exit tax is patently unconstitutional. It has been. I've brought it up in multiple cases. The government doesn't want to contest it, so they usually cut a sweetheart deal with my clients who are like, I'm out of America for a while. I don't want to deal with all this legal risk and exposure. A rate which keeps doubling every year, basically. The number of people who realize they need a plan B now is dramatically exploding and expanding at a credible pace. And we'll have a chance to discuss that with people in Orlando coming up here in a few weeks. About the insanity of a lot of what the government's trying to do and how you can have your own freedom plan. But their goal is to prevent you from having that freedom as much as possible. Control your food, control your medicine, control your body, control your property, control your means of exchange, control your means of, that's what a central bank digital currency is about. It's not about finance. It's about controlling things. It's about prohibiting you from getting in your car. It's like that X-Files episode of the recent edition where he doesn't tip the drone sushi maker, and all of a sudden the taxi cabs, which is automated, is trying to kill him. The little little vacuum that's automated is trying to kill him. The electronic part of the house machine is trying to kill him. Because that's their kind of world is control. It's same like you file a 1040. It's really a confession form. You tell people the name of a tax deduction. Here's who my significant others are. Here's what my religious beliefs are. Here's what I care about and give to. Here's what causes I believe in. Here's what my politics are. It's a personal roadmap into the most intimate aspects of your everyday life that they now can use for control. And that's what this is. The property tax is ultimately going to tax. They're going to try to reimpose the head tax. That's where it's going to go ultimately. Look at these deadbeat bums who aren't going out there working. So let's impose a labor tax on their unrealized labor gain. That is basically the head tax. You exist, you owe the government money for existing. That's what they're trying to do. They'll start with the property tax, then go to the taxing us as people. And the goal is ultimately not about raising revenue. It's about control.
Yeah. And on that note, this is something that you're going to be going over at Rebel Capitalist Live. And you're going to be going over a plan as to how people can not only maintain, but hopefully increase their levels of personal freedom. And right now, it's getting more difficult to do, but it's possible. But you've got to start planning for this stuff right now. So people can get their tickets. You're one of the speakers. Robert, I don't even know if I've shown you the speaker lineup. Josh, can you do a quick screen share for me? Can you see this, Robert?
Not yet.
Oh, let's see here. Oh, I've got to do the screen share. That's right.
As I always tell people, I'm not a boomer, but I play one when it comes to technology.
Yeah. So, okay, Josh, can you do it now so Barnes can see?
Yeah, you just need to go to the tab.
I did.
Sweet. Now I see it.
Okay, so these are the speakers. I don't know if I've told you. It's Mike Green. Kenny's going to be there. Snyder's going to be there. Hartman, Chris McIntosh, Mark Moss, Joseph Wang. Do you know Ivor Cummins?
Yes. Yeah, he does really cool stuff on a lot of the pandemic-related stuff, breaking down the real technology of that.
And the World Economic Forum, the Global Elite.
Yes.
Have you met him? Have you been on his show or anything?
I haven't met him. I've just followed him on social media.
Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to connecting you guys because you two really need to start doing content for sure. Same thing with Rich Cooper. He talks about a lot of the red pill stuff we were talking about earlier. I said if you only look at this line of the speakers, you think the only people I'm bringing are bald guys. But I show that McIntosh.
Well, that's what happened to the income tax. That's what
Yeah. And then we've got some of your good buddies. Kiyosaki's going to be there. Brent, Viva He's in Orlando, isn't he? He's gonna teach me how to bowl.
He lives in Miami, but he's coming up.
Yeah, he's gonna teach me.
I think
you
guys might go bowling.
Yeah. We're gonna live stream that, Josh, for sure. And then Tracy's gonna be there in the Uneducated Economist. So guys, you got to get your tickets ASAP at rebelcapitalistlive.com. And then tell us what you're doing, Robert, with Viva on locals and YouTube. And I know he's producing a lot of awesome content.
Oh, yeah. So you can always follow Viva Fry on YouTube and Rumble. We have a locals board where everything is organized, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And I'm creating a law center to support sort of the 4 freedoms: food freedom, financial freedom, medical freedom, political freedom, dealing with all of these sort of touchstone issues. And that's 1776lawcenter.com.
Right.
And we're going to do an exclusive series for Rebel Capitalist Pro about freedom planning. You know, whether you call it Plan B, contingency planning, I just call it freedom planning. If you're sitting in Berlin, February 1929, probably the people that came up with a plan didn't suffer the consequences of what was coming. Or if you were in St. Petersburg, January 1917, those that came up with a plan didn't suffer the consequences of what the leaders themselves suffered. So there's ways to put contingency plan and at scale and at multiple levels. Like sometimes people think, oh, I got to be a multimillionaire to do that. No, you don't. There's all kinds of planning you can put in place. So when the riots break out locally, you have a backup plan for that. Whether it's if the system starts to collapse, you have a plan for that. If they suddenly decide you're not supposed to leave your home under mass house arrest, you already have a plan in advance for that. You have if they suddenly want to come and take everything from your bank or take everything from your home or take everything from your property, you have backup contingency plans for that as well. There's ways to build an everyday financial underground railroad that can secure your liberty at multiple levels. And that's what we'll be discussing. And we'll be doing some stuff for Rebel Capitalist Pro on little examples of that, illustrations of that, provisions of that, and keeping you alert and awake, as George has done, of your risks. I run into so many people who don't realize what the system can do. It's like I've been talking to the Amish, and the Amish are like, we've never experienced. All of a sudden, they're trying to take away the people who help with our animals. They're trying to take away our ability to sell our fresh milk and fresh food. They're trying to come at us about how we handle breeding of animals. They're coming at us about how we handle our property. We've been here for a couple hundred years. We were promised protection from harassment based on our independent religious beliefs by William Penn and his founders. But they're discovering how the world can turn upside down in a second. And that's where you need every plan available so that you have the biggest means available to maximize your personal freedom.
Absolutely. Very well said. So, guys, get your tickets again to Rebel Capitalist Live. That is May 31st, June 2nd, Orlando. So the last thing you want to do is go through life with your head buried in the sand, and you don't want to wait till the end, because then it's very reactionary. You got to start planning for this stuff now. So anyway, Robert, thanks a lot for a fantastic conversation as always, buddy, and we'll see you in a couple weeks in Orlando.
Will do. Thanks, man.